The fighter is the original heroic archetype, not just in Dungeons and Dragons, but in literature, film, games, and movies. The concept of a person who fights for what they believe in with nothing more than a trusted blade and their own skill is a story as old as time. In this video, we will be diving deep into this iconic class, all with the intention of making you a better role player through the use of the class color system. A system not just designed to help you build characters, but to play them as well. If you're new to the class color system, then don't worry, it's easy to follow along. First, we will discuss the core color of the class. Then I will craft 3 potential characters and explain why I chose their set of colors. Finally, I will go over each color and how it is expressed through the fighter class. With these tools, I'm confident that the next fighter you create will be far more robust and interesting. Alright, gather your weapons and prepare your next action. Let's begin with the core color of the fighter. The fighter is a class whose focus is their martial prowess, and how their skill set can be utilized to achieve their goals. They aren't just some simple city guard or soldier, but rather someone whose prowess has allowed them to rise above such a paltry station. What is interesting as well is that combat is a skill that is one part training and the other part experience. You can't learn to be a fighter solely from reading a book or hitting some dummies. You have to test your blade. I think this does make the fighter unique from classes such as the wizard or the bard, and that those classes can gain power purely from study and practice, while the fighter must bloody its blade. The next thing to understand about the fighter is that its martial ability does not dictate the person they are or their motivations, but rather it is indeed the inverse. What I mean is that the character isn't the way they are because they are a fighter. Instead, they are a fighter because of the way they are. Most classes imprint themselves quite heavily onto your character, but really the fighter can range so drastically in motivations that it's not bound by its class. To truly understand what I mean, we must continue on by looking to the core color of the class chosen by Wizards of the Coast. Remember, the core color is the color you will most often associate with the class, and will tell us a lot about their core motivations. Pulling up the card, we see that they have chosen white-red. And while these are great colors for a fighter, I wouldn't exactly agree to their use as a core color. In fact, I'm going to do something I rarely do, and that is not only disagree with Wizards of the Coast, but state that the fighter should not even have a core color. You see, the fighter can represent each color equally because of what drives the class, and that is the character behind it. The fighter is in many ways an extension of your character, and not the reason for its being. They could be someone who fights for honor in a better world, or they could just as easily be a character whose intentions are selfish, with a simple desire to take what they want. They can be wild and violent, or they can be somber and reserved. There is no inherent motivations or temperaments defined by this class. Now, I know what I've said so far may leave you feeling like you have no provided direction, but this is actually the beautiful thing about the class, because it frees you up to create. Instead of making your character the way they are because of the class, you instead are free to craft a character who chose to be a fighter because of the way they are. With this in mind, I will build 3 characters for you. That way you can have some examples to work from that feature a range of personalities and backgrounds. Remember though, stay until the end, as at that point I will discuss each color individually in the context of the class. That way you can mix and match to create your own. In a small town rarely shown on any map lived a child who only seemed to draw attention from bullies. They always felt inadequate and weak, never able to truly stand up for themselves. This continued on until their teenage years, but it was then that a fire began to grow inside of them. They were no longer sad when thinking about their place, but rather they were angry. They were tired of being pushed around and forgotten. As soon as they were of age, they left to join the king's army, as they felt this was their only opportunity to become stronger and to prove themselves. They left town with no fanfare, not even their parents cared that they had left. The army was hard at first, but they took their new life as a way to start over, and instead of allowing themselves to be walked over, they replied to any transgression with anger. At first, they were beaten for standing up, but eventually through training and experience, they began to win fights. This built up their confidence, and they put everything they had into learning everything that they could about fighting. From blade and fist to bow and spear, they worked at it every day. Soon, no one crossed their path with ill intentions. The stronger and more skilled they got, the more their confidence grew, and the ways in which people were cautious in their presence gave them a rush. Months had passed, winter had come and went, and with spring the war horns were sounded. It was here where everything changed. They put their skills truly to the test and experienced their first taste of battle. The day was won, but they once again felt inadequate. So once they were back at camp, they spent as little time recouping as they could and went right back to training. Then the horn would be called once again, and another battle would take place. This time they were ready, and in that day they made a hero of themselves. 2 years would go by in this way, until finally the war, in which he still barely knew the cause of, was over. What to do now, they thought to themselves. Should I return home and become a farmer, or should I see what else is out there for me? What new strengths I could gain? What new ways I could prove myself? Their hands, calloused and stained by blood, could no longer hold a tool or an embrace with a hug. No, they were forged to hold a blade, to fight. For this character, I created them with black and red in mind. That desire for power, to prove oneself, is all too black. The rage and the motivating emotions coming from the red side. These colors do not denote someone who is bloodthirsty per se, but rather someone whose emotions drove them into the frantic need to be the one who dictates their life. And in their mind, only through the gaining of more strength and recognition can they be the person they want to be. To drive themselves as far away from that scared, weak child as they could. For our next character, I will be dropping both of these colors, and instead craft one using white, blue, and green. In complete contrast, this character grew up in a place of privilege and prestige, part of a long lineage whose name was known across the region. This family prided themselves on creating some of the greatest generals and battle masters known through the land. In order to keep their position of prominence and neutrality, they would send their sons and daughters to become advisors of lords throughout the land. This, of course, has caused siblings to work against one another, but they are trained to always put their job first. For over 300 years this has gone on, and the family has remained a name set in reverence. This is the upbringing our character finds themselves in. Trained in all things of war in an academic manner, they are a skilled fighter and tactician. When it comes time to be sent to a lord as an advisor, this character begins to have second thoughts. They were a person with a kind heart, a hero deep down. They, above all else, wanted to use their training to help people, but felt that simply advising a lord in the ways of war would do little else but bring suffering to the common people. And that was not a life they wanted to live, or the person they wished to become. On the other hand, they adored their family's legacy, steeped in its traditions, and wore their crest with pride. On the night before they were to leave, they spoke with their mother about how they felt. Their mother listened, but told them in the end that they had a duty to fulfill, and that by sending a child to each lord, they were indeed helping keep balance. No one king would have a dire advantage, and that in the end, duty was stronger than any personal desire. Our character thought about their place all night, and knew they were trained and raised with this inevitability in mind, and so they left to fulfill their legacy. The next day, while they were on their way to meet with the King of the West, they encountered a village and decided to rest here, as the sun wouldn't stand in the sky much longer. While at the inn, they didn't get much rest, as they stood out among the farmers and merchants. The villagers told them of the raids that had taken place against their village, and how the king refused to send soldiers to deal with the bandit camp. Our character listened but knew it was not their place to get involved. That is, until they spent the entire night thinking of ways they could help, and of how they could not move on knowing this was happening. So the next day they spoke with the village elder and gathered 10 of the most capable men and set out to put a stop to this. With this small contingent, our character was able to put all of their training to the test and remove the bandit problem. They felt so good about helping those in need and knew that this was their destiny. Much to the ire of the King of the West and their family, our character sent a letter stating that they would not be joining the king and instead would set out to find others they could help. They indeed feared what their decision would mean for them and their family, but they knew they had to put their abilities to good use, and serving some king was not the way. For this character, I went with Bant, and the correlation to each color is fairly evident here. For one, we have white. This represents the character's desire to help those that cannot help themselves. And in an interesting way, they cast off their duty in a form of self-sacrifice in order to do what's right. Then we have blue, which reflects their deep training and tactful mindset. They are the type of fighter who takes on the ways of battle in a scholarly manner. Finally, we have green, which in this instance is the deep traditions that define them. Sure, in the end they reject their born purpose, but that is not because they hate their family's traditions. No, they are proud of their lineage, but they do feel like their true purpose is elsewhere. With this character covered, I would like to create one more example, and to do so, we will drop both blue and green, but add in black to see what this means. Raised far from any normal situation a child might endure was our white-black character. They were taught in the ways of the samurai from the moment they could speak. They held a blade before they could walk, and they drew blood before they hit puberty. Trained and raised to be nothing more than a tool of their daimyo, our character was cold and efficient. They never questioned their mission or place in life. They would go out and kill those they were ordered to kill, go back to the castle they called home, and would wait for the next command. This lasted for many years, but as time dragged on, the daimyo grew more and more paranoid, and thus the missions became less and less about killing other warriors, and more about killing those that threatened their position. Then, one night at the age of 25, our character was sent on a mission that would change their life forever. An up-and-coming family would be the target of this night's mission. Our character cut their way through every samurai in their path, but once at the door and looking down at his scared family, our character stopped for the first time in their life. The children weeping, the parents holding them tight, this character caught a reflection of themselves as they walked forward, and for the first time in their life, they truly saw themselves for what they were, and didn't like what they saw. So, for the first time in their life, they did not complete their mission, but ran far away. Years have passed, and our character wanders, taking small jobs for those in need, only taking as much payment as that which will sustain them. They look to right the wrongs of who they were, all while their past never seems to let them go. For this character, I wanted to use white and black to showcase a fighter whose inner mind is one of conflict. On one hand, they are trying to find a better path and do better for others, but they cannot deny who they are. They feel rotten from the inside, a demon deep within, represented by their black side. Part of themselves feels comfortable reverting back to their old deadly past, a life that had some semblance of order. Well, they want their future to be brighter, and so they struggle to become a hero rather than a villain. Now that you've seen the color pie applied to 3 potential characters, it's time we discuss how each of the colors can be used in the context of the fighter. That way you can have a better idea of how to apply the colors to a character of your very own. Like I said at the top, the fighter is a unique class, in that it really doesn't affect the colors as much as the colors affect the class. That said, there are reasons why our characters fight, so let's dive into that. To start, let's discuss white. In the case of the fighter who is white aligned, they can represent one who is selfless, one who raises its blade for others and uses their skills to defend the weak. In another way, it can be a fighter who's closer to a knight, one who's part of some order of warriors that defend a crown or country. In the end, white will be the color that places the intentions of this fighter into the hands of others. Next, we have blue. A blue-aligned fighter is one that practices the blade in everything to do with war and combat in an academic way. They see combat as something to be learned and understood, a problem that can be solved with more training and studying. They might seek out different styles and weapons in order to constantly have something new to master. Next is black, a color that is present in a fighter who uses their skills to take what they wish from life. They want glory and recognition. They are adventurers that seek out treasure and want their names spoken of in reverence across the land. This can be a heroic trait if it's not taken too far. In another way, black can represent a deadly and brutal way of fighting, a character who does not mind getting their blade bloodied. When we apply red to the fighter, something interesting happens. Its martial ability is in many ways a form of self-expression. Whether it be through rage or simply passion, the red-aligned fighter feels like their weapon is a part of them, and it's how they express themselves. Finally, we have green. In the case of this color, when applied to the fighter, it's representing themes of tradition. Typically, we see long lineages of a particular way of fighting passed down through many generations. This fighter is carrying on in this tradition as a form of duty or purpose. As you can see, the fighter is a rather dynamic class, one that is open in how it can be expressed and interpreted. This is honestly a beautiful thing, in that you're free to explore a wide variation of fighters. So go out and craft that fighter which reflects the kind of hero or villain you wish to become. Well, I hope that gave you something to think about in the context of a fighter and got you inspired. But if you're stuck making a character, then check out this video here where I use my own system for creating a random D&D character. I also just want to say thank you so much to my patrons for their support. It really means a lot that you guys are there for me. With that, friends, I will catch you in the multiverse. Bye.